Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Hello and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 1 in Genesis chapter 41. We're continuing in our study in Genesis, and we're getting there. Just a few more chapters, and we should reach the end of Genesis maybe next 2 years at the rate we've been going. I'm going to read the first several verses. Genesis 41, verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret unto them unto Pharaoh. Okay, I'll stop reading there. And many of us are familiar with this historical account in the book of Genesis concerning the dreams of Pharaoh and Joseph's eventual interpretation of those dreams. And if you've been following E-Bible Fellowship's Bible studies, you I'm sure have realized that we look for the deeper spiritual meaning. That's what we're going to be interested in concerning these dreams. And we know they have spiritual meaning, just like in the previous chapter when Joseph was in prison and he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker. Well, it so happens that that's going to prove key in chapter 41 as far as the butler who was restored to his butlership or his cupbearing. And when Pharaoh has these dreams and none of his magicians or astrologers or wise men of Egypt can interpret the dreams to him, that jars the butler's memory because he had forgot Joseph. Even though Joseph said to him, when you're restored, remember me. And he did not for 2 full years. 2 full years. That helps us to understand this reference in verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And right away we think, well, 2 full years from what? Which point? And it must be from the previous chapter, and the conclusion of the previous chapter was Joseph interpreting the dream of the butler and the baker, and everything came to pass as Joseph had interpreted to them. The baker was executed, the butler restored. And it was, they were thrown into prison. It wasn't long at all. Once they were in prison that they had the dream and Joseph interpreted the dream, and then it was 3 days. 3 days after that that the dream was fulfilled. Now, Joseph himself was, from what we can gather, not very long in the prison either. He had been in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife made false accusation against him. Potiphar believed his wife and threw Joseph into prison. And we can see something of a spiritual nature right away with this reference to 2 full years, because we understand that that 2 full years since the butler has been restored, and I think we can also understand since Joseph has been in prison, 2 full years from the time that Potiphar has put him in prison, as he believed his wife who lied, and we also know that Joseph is soon going to be called out of prison, because the butler does remember. He says, "I remember my faults this day," and he tells Pharaoh about Joseph and his ability to interpret. And when Joseph is brought out of prison, we're told how old he is. Go to Genesis 41, verse 46, and it says, "And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt." Joseph was 30 years old. Okay, now let's ask the question, when did Joseph's trial begin? When did his terrible affliction begin? And the answer is when he was 17. Let's turn back to Genesis 37, and it says in verse 2 of Genesis 37, "These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought unto his father their evil report." So Joseph is 17, and soon his father will send him, because basically Joseph is the only one he can trust, send him to see how his brethren are faring. They are with the flocks, and when they approach, the brethren plot against him and eventually throw him into a pit. But then by chance, no, by the sovereign will of God, God arranges circumstances, and he arranged the circumstance of the Midianite traders traveling by just at that time, and the brothers had an idea. Why should our brother's blood be on our hands? Let's sell him. And that way they would, take a sword to him or kill him, and yet he would be out of their hair. He would be taken away some far place, and they didn't really care about Joseph. They hated Joseph, and they did not give much consideration to the fact he would be a slave and the horrible things that happened to slaves. None of that. But the significant thing is he's 17. 17. He's sold by these Midianite slavers. He's sold in Egypt to Potiphar, and then Joseph begins to work in Potiphar's house, and he quickly does well. The favor of God is upon him, and everything he does is blessed. Remember that psalm in Psalm 1, where we read Psalm 1, it says in verse 1, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of Jehovah, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper." And we won't go through it, but that word prosper, I believe, is used to describe the account, the historical account of Joseph in Potiphar's house. Everything was prospering. The man's household had never run so well, and he fully trusted Joseph. Well, given the reference of 2 full years in Genesis 41, that we can identify with Joseph's time in prison, which would mean that Joseph was 28 when he is cast into prison. 2 full years later, he's 30, and he comes out of prison as Pharaoh calls him, and he shaves, changes his raiment, and hastily is brought into the presence of Pharaoh, and he does interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and he's lifted up to the second in command of all Egypt. Incredible. But again, as far as the timeline, 17 to 28 in Potiphar's house, 11 years, 28 to 30 in prison, 2 years, combined 13 years. And we know that's the case. It is 13 years. Age 30 minus 17, 13 years. And 13 years, the number 13 points to superfullness or the end of the world. And so it's unsurprising that one of the main focuses here, one of the things that God is highlighting is after 13 years, Joseph will come forth and he will interpret Pharaoh's dream. He will make known to Pharaoh the meaning of the dream. And the meaning of the dream has to do with 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, but immediately followed by 7 years of famine. And we'll get into this, but we do know the 7 years of famine, God likens to Great Tribulation. There's no question about that. Absolutely no question. The 7 years of famine are likened to Great Tribulation because God uses those very same words, Great Tribulation, in the Greek, in the New Testament, megathalipsis, to describe the famine. So that helps us know, well, that's the time of the end. That's the time of the end, the time of Great Tribulation, and we can pinpoint the actual Great Tribulation that God has arranged. Starting in the year 1988, Satan is loosed and comes against the churches, and there's an awful, grievous famine that takes place within the churches and congregations of the world. Well, 1988 happens to be the 13,000th year of Earth's history. See? 13,000 years, and there will be awful spiritual famine in the churches, which is what the 7 years of famine will point to. And right away we can see why this 13-year span of time, and Joseph is now 30. He's 30, but 13 years have passed. And what is Joseph going to do but interpret? He's going to interpret the dreams. And this interpretation, this focus on interpretation, ties in with God's end time plan to reveal the hidden things of the Bible. as the Lord said to Daniel in Daniel 12, seal up the word, O Daniel, till the time of the end. And in one place, Daniel 12, verse 4, it goes on to say, and knowledge shall be increased. So we're not surprised that there is continuing emphasis on God's end time judgment program. And by the way, now with the 2 full year reference, again, Joseph 28 to Joseph age 30, which would, you need those 2 years to get to 13 years. And in Potiphar's house, 11 years. Well, we spent some time in Genesis 37 when Joseph himself had dreams, if you remember that. And I'll read it in Genesis 37, verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren. And they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. Okay, so Joseph and his brethren, he had a dream where his brethren bowed down to him. How many brothers did he have? Well, there were 12 sons of Israel. And so he had 11. 11 brothers bowed down to Joseph. And then he has a second dream in verse 9 of Genesis 37. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him, and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And here we have confirmation concerning the brethren. In the second dream, they're represented by 11 stars. The number 11 wasn't used in the first dream, but we can gather that. And here the brethren are related to the 11 stars, and then there's sun and the moon that Jacob identifies to mother and father. And so sun, moon, and stars, 13, 11 stars, 1 sun, 1 moon, 13. But see how it's broken up? 11 first, then the second dream, 13, which is 2 more than 11. And why is this? What is the point? What is the spiritual meaning behind Joseph's dreams? And how does it relate to Genesis 41 with the 2 full years? Or actually with Joseph's whole period of time in Egypt until he comes out of prison? How's that broken up? 11 years Potiphar's house, 2 years prison, total 13. And we can see, and remember in the dream, the first dream, the sheaves, they bowed down to Joseph. Second dream, the stars and the sun and moon all bowed down to Joseph. And when Joseph is brought out of prison at age 30, after 13 years of severe trial, what is going to happen? Eventually, he will, he will interpret Pharaoh's dreams, and Egypt will become a great power in the 7 years of plenty, and they store up grain against the time of famine. And Joseph's brethren will come into Egypt and bow the knee before him, because they don't recognize him. They think he's a great ruler in Egypt beneath Pharaoh, and he is a great ruler in Egypt beneath Pharaoh. But there, and we even read that Joseph remembered his dream. So there is an historical fulfillment to that. There's a deeper spiritual fulfillment at the time of the end of the world, our time, but there's that historical fulfillment. And that is what God is touching upon, the end of 2 full years. The end of 2 full years. Okay, let's go back to Genesis 41. And Pharaoh dreamed at the end of verse 1 and verse 2. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. The word stalk is translated as reed in the book of Ezekiel, a measuring reed. So we can get the image. And by the way, the word rank is the same word that's translated fat-fleshed in verse 2 concerning the kine, well-favored kine and fat-fleshed. In verse 5, it's Strong's number 1277. It's the word rank. In verse 7, rank and full ears, same word. And also in verse 18, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine fat-fleshed. And in verse 20, fat kine. It's not fat-fleshed, just the word fat. So it's used all those times, and we definitely understand what that means. You have a nice cow, a nice fat cow, and plenty of meat, or you have these fat stalks of corn. They're rank and good, fat-fleshed and good. They're the best corn you can imagine. And then the ill-favored kine and the ill-favored the corn comes up after them, devours the good fat flesh kine and the good rank and good ears of corn. And so we'll hold off on, God's going to go over this a few times in this chapter. Right now, let's think about the kine. The kine. What do the kine represent that are well-favored kine and fat-fleshed? They're, very healthy, very healthy. Again, the best cows you could have. And what is the picture here? Well, when we look at kine, we find a couple of references that help us to see what can be in view. If we go to Hosea chapter 4, Hosea is after Daniel, Hosea 4, and in verse 16, it says, "For Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer." And the word heifer is 6510 in Strong's, in the Hebrew concordance. Same word as kine. For Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer. Now Jehovah will feed them as a lamb in a large place. Okay, so God is referring to Israel like a kine. The word heifer, same as kine. Also in Amos chapter 4, and after Hosea, it's Joel, then Amos. Amos 4 verse 1, it says there, hear this word, ye kine of Bashan, that are in the mountain of Samaria, which oppress the poor, which crush the needy, which say to their masters, bring and let us drink. Again, ye kine of Bashan, that are in the mountain of Samaria. Samaria identifies with Israel. So does Bashan. Bashan is that land that was on the other side Jordan when Israel came, and I think the 2.5 tribes settled on that side of the river, and then they went with Israel crossing Jordan to assist in the conquest of the land of Canaan. And we read in Joshua 17 concerning Cain in verse 1, it says, there was also a lot for the tribe of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph, to wit, for Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, because he was a man of war. Therefore he had Gilead and Bashan. Gilead and Bashan. And this is the dividing of the land by lot, and Bashan is given along with Gilead. So it is territory under the power and authority of Israel at the point of the conquest of the land. If we turn to Psalm 68, it says in verse 15, Psalm 68, verse 15, the hill of God is as the hill of Bashan, a high hill as the hill of Bashan. It identifies with God's kingdom, hill, mountain, similar thing, and representing the Mount Zion, the kingdom of God. The hill of God is as the hill of Bashan. And so it's a figure that does identify with God's kingdom, and Israel was the outward representation of God's kingdom on the earth. Therefore, when God says, ye kine of Bashan, as he does in Amos 4, verse 1, we understand he's speaking of people. He's speaking of people. Well, that's as far as we're going to get in this study. Lord willing, when we get together in our next study in Genesis 41, we'll continue to look at the kine and see how it is representing Israel or people, and also how that word kine is translated or has another word that's identical to it that's translated in a very interesting way. And we'll take a look at some of those verses in our next Bible study.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.